Welcome to the AI Applied podcast. I'm your host, Jaeden Schaefer, joined by the legendary New York Times bestseller, Connor Grennan, the chief AI architect of NYU Stern, the man, the myth, and the legend, the LinkedIn influencer. I feel like you actually should introduce yourself as a LinkedIn influencer.
I love this new intro, Jade. We got to do this every time. This is amazing.
And by the way, if you haven't already, make sure to get Connor's AI Mindset course. It is linked in the description. There are companies that will literally buy this course for over 10,000 of their employees because it's so transformational. So you have to go check that out. Okay, with all of the intros out of the way, today on the show, we're going to be talking about Anthropic. They have a brand new release, Opus 4.6. There is drama because OpenAI tried to kind of front run them and release something at the exact same time. There was some shenanigans that happened. We also have a whole bunch of drama between Anthropic releasing a new AI TV commercial that apparently is going to air for the Super Bowl, and Sam Altman is very salty about it. So we're going to get into all the drama, and of course, I think most importantly, everything included in the new Opus 4.6 Pro. They have these things called agent teams, which I know you guys are dying to get into. So let's get into all of that. Connor, kick us off. What's the most exciting thing? You are the OG Anthropic user. What's exciting to you about this?
Anthropic is absolutely crushing it these days. It's funny, you know what, Jaeden, we did this where we were like, what's like the company of the year kind of thing, and clearly OpenAI owned 2023, and I sort of like called Anthropic like the company of the year for 2024. They just, from the moment where they started 2024 to the end of 2024, they just kind of came out of the woodwork. Originally, Anthropic, just a tiny history lesson. Anthropic, as you know, Dario Amodei and his sister, they left OpenAI. They were sort of like top people at OpenAI to go over to Anthropic, really as a safety move. That was their first thing. Remember, they had like this long-term benefit trust. They had this very strange corporate setup, which is sort of like supposed to benefit users. They also have their AI kind of constitution. Essentially, like Anthropic has to follow a constitution, which is just not what happens with other things, especially when we look at like Meta and places like that. But also, like, they were sort of like, original longer context, all that kind of stuff. But first and foremost, Anthropic was supposed to be safe. So we're like, well, I guess if somebody cares about safety, it's sort of like buying a Volvo instead of any other car. But Anthropic, sort of like 2024 was just like picking up steam. 2025, they started crushing it with Claude Code. And now, in the last, like, what do you think, Jaeden, like 3 or 4 months, the world has realized Anthropic is like an absolute juggernaut. I find Anthropic to probably be the best model out there. I just do. I also love Gemini. I use Gemini all the time, but Anthropic is my kind of like go-to thing. And the Wall Street Journal today, Jaeden, just to sort of timestamp this for a second, their front page news is about Anthropic. It says the week Anthropic tanked the market and pulled ahead of its rivals. So we can think about like what 4.6 does, the new model. But I don't think to me, it's not noticeably better for what I do than 4.5. I'm just stunned that they dropped it and coders are finding it better. But let me just just say a couple things that's in this Wall Street Journal thing. It says, it starts, Anthropic once appeared as an also-ran in the chaotic race, blah, 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 but they unleashed its most advanced model yet on Thursday, et cetera, et cetera. And all of a sudden, like all the prognosticators and everybody else are like, this is amazing. So the thing about Anthropic, Jaeden, that I just sort of like want to point out for folks that are not coders, that are not like caring that much about, Opus 4.6, is that it seems like everything it does just knocks it out of the park. And Jaeden, I'm going to steal the mic for one more second on this because I love Gemini. I'm a huge, huge Gemini fan. I love OpenAI, all that kind of stuff. But even with this, like I was like last night, I was working with Robert Haslam, who sort of like, helps me build everything. He's our creative strategist, brilliant guy, knows more about AI than anybody I know. And he was sort of like building these different folders within within Google Drive. And I had Gemini on the side. You can kind of click the little Gemini icon and sort of like talk to whatever's happening on your screen. I'm like, hey, how can I find the file path, blah, blah, blah. And just wasn't able to do it. Finally, I'm like, oh my gosh, I clicked on the Claude extension. Claude not only told me what it was, it's like, well, what are you trying to do? I'm like, I'm trying to download. It's like, let me just do that for you. It just feels sometimes, Jaeden, like Claude is the adult in the room. It's impressive.
Yep, 100%. I think I actually use it all the time, the Claude extension. It's super useful. I would screen share it, but it's like outside of my screen share abilities if you're watching this on YouTube. But yeah, the Gemini side folder thing or the sidebar thing, it's good. I actually come to sometimes where I like tell it to do something and it's like, I'm sorry, like I can't do it when I'm like organize this like Google, this Google Drive thing, like move the files from here to there. Like I'll say something like that, and it's like, I'm sorry, like I can't do that. I can't like take action, but like I can help you figure out how to whatever. Okay, that would be like Gemini, and then I literally just open up the Claude sidebar, and I'm like, Claude, you do it, and then Claude like takes control of my screen and like moves everything around. So I mean, you got to give it to Anthropic. They're doing some hard things that other people are definitely shying away from or worried about, and I think they're doing them really well. I actually use the Claude Google extension, Google Chrome extension all the time. Okay, Opus 4.6. This is a huge launch for them. Everyone's saying they're pushing this as the whole stock market's crashing because Anthropic's been, like putting out so many different software integrations that, a lot of these big software companies are in trouble and their stocks are kind of tanking. I'm actually super excited about everything that they've released. One thing in particular that they have is their agent teams. And I'll read you a quote from Scott White, who's the head of product at Anthropic, and what he said about this specifically. He said, instead of one agent working through tasks sequentially, you can split the work across multiple agents, each owning its piece and coordinating directly with the others. So essentially, they're comparing this kind of new feature to having a really talented team of humans that are working for you. And they said that basically if they segment the agents out and they give them each a different responsibility, it lets them coordinate in parallel and they actually work a lot faster. Now, this is actually something interesting because OpenAI recently released a new version of Codex, their coding agent that does this. And I've had people like criticize, like, well, it's not quite as good as Anthropic. Well, it seems like Anthropic wasn't very far behind on their heels with this brand new release of going from 4.5 to 4.6, where they're also literally doing this, but it's also going to be baked into Claude Code and other tools like that. So you're going to start getting this exact same benefit, which is really exciting. Something else that they offer in Opus 4.6 that I think a lot of people are excited about, and honestly, this kind of reminds me of the OG days when OpenAI and Anthropic were kind of duking it out in the beginning. They just added a 1 million token context window to their models, which is huge. It's massive. It's a huge context window to the new model. What's interesting though is I remember like in the very early days, I think when we first started this podcast, Connor, I was using Anthropic because of its context window, and back then it was probably like maybe it was like 200,000 tokens, and we're like, or 150,000 tokens. We're like, oh my gosh, it's amazing. ChatGPT was very limited in what it could do back then. You like it didn't remember context very well, and so it was just like Anthropic was like this amazing tool for that, and then of course all the battles and everything's changed. But it's kind of fun to me to see that they get back to the basics sometimes and just open up these massive context windows, which is really cool for companies that are doing coding because it can see your whole code base. There's a lot of really cool use cases there. I remember in the early days, people are like, why would you even need a 1 million token context window? Like, do you need to put a whole book in there and talk to it about the book? I mean, yeah, some people do want to do that, but I think code bases is an easy win for this. Now, I will also say they're not the only one doing this. Gemini, in their last model that they released, they had a 1 million token context window. And so I think a lot of people were actually switching to Gemini because the context window was so big. And I think now this is Anthropic kind of pulling people back in. So a lot of really cool updates, the agents, the context windows, obviously it's getting smarter. So I think a lot of people are going to like this.
Yeah, I agree, and totally with everything you said, especially the context window. I think people very quickly forget, like when you start dumping in another PDF and another PDF, like that's what happens with me anyway. I start kind of dumping in more and more and more, and all of a sudden it will like run out of space, and that's just not going to be the case anymore. The other thing is like, yeah, Gemini is phenomenal, and I use Gemini all the time, and Gemini already has all these integrations, and it's going to have a huge head start on this because it has 2 billion eyeballs or something like that. So how does Claude and Anthropic, how are they making the front page of the Wall Street Journal? How are they, causing other stocks to tank and things like that? Well, it's actually kind of specific, right? I mean, like essentially what's happening is they are getting into the game in the same way OpenAI is kind of getting into the game to kind of start competing with Salesforce and Azure and AWS and everybody else, in terms of like agents and things like that. What's happening with Anthropic is really interesting. So two things I just want to kind of like point out. Number one is, it now works in Excel, which if that works, that's going to be absolutely amazing because what you're saying is we don't need Claude to create its own spreadsheet, although like it would not be surprising to me because Claude's main customer base is the enterprise, right? It's not individuals, which I think is a really, really smart move. Like they're never going to compete with OpenAI. OpenAI just had too much of a head start. They're never going to get there, and they're never going to compete with Google. But what they do get is, something like, and I'm not going to name companies that I know are working with them, because I don't know if it's public or not, but like I work with companies through, AI Mindset. Like we work with companies that are like 10, 20,000 person organizations. These are, our enterprise partnerships where we train up the whole senior leadership, and then we have a course that we roll out and we sort of like work with them. But these organizations are saying we are switching over to Claude, right? So like that
Yep.
in one fell swoop, they're making millions of dollars. That's number one. But the other thing, and if anybody knows anything about law, and Above the Law is this kind of like a blog that is put out by lawyers and things like that. It's this great site. It sort of talks about legal tech. It talks about everything going on in the law. And they're all freaking out, right? Like, why is like Harvey and Lagore and everybody else freaking out a little bit? Because now Claude is getting involved in that legal tech space. Jaeden, I work with a ton of firms. Like, that is a huge space. And now they're rolling out into beta, which I've not tried yet. I don't know if you've seen this yet or not, but like rolling it into PowerPoint. So essentially,
Yeah.
it's like jumping into something that like was already built by Microsoft and saying, hey, we can do this better than anybody. And I don't doubt it. That's the thing. Like, this is where Copilot, like, really, I'm actually really bullish on Copilot, but by God, like they sort of like have to like really up their game. But that's why everybody's sort of saying like, Anthropic is tanking the market.
100%. Okay, the last thing that I wanted to mention in regards to tanking the market and kind of where they're going, you mentioned
Yeah.
PowerPoint. I think that it's doing a great job with PowerPoint. Here's a quote from them, specifically from White, on what Opus is kind of evolving into, and I think this is where we can see this going into the future. And of course, I think this is partially why the market is reacting so strongly. He said that Opus has evolved from a model that was really capable in one specific domain, so we know software development, right, for cloud coding, into something that is, quote, really useful for a broader set of knowledge workers. We noticed a lot of people who are not professional software developers using Claude Code simply because it was really amazing engine to do tasks. So I think essentially they have this gold mine where they realize their product is really good for just getting tasks done. And I mean, like, you and I are great examples of this, Connor, because we both
Yeah.
have the Claude like sidebar, which is kind of just built off of the same tech as Claude Code, and I just get it to do things on my page, and I'm like, wow, this is really good at getting tasks done for me. I think they realize they have an absolute gold mine there, and so they've come out with a whole bunch of different tools. They have a version of Claude Code, which is a Claude Assistant, I believe, or that's probably the wrong word. They just rolled it out last week. If you remember what that is, Connor.
Not Cowork. You're not talking about. You're talking about Codework, or not Cowork?
Cowork, yeah, Claude Cowork, where so essentially it can work alongside you and get stuff done. So I think they realize they have this, and people are going to start using this not just for software engineers, but product managers, financial analysts, people from a ton of different industries are going to start rolling this in. And so a lot of this is kind of what's threatening the full industry. So
Yeah,
a
it sure is. Yeah.
so a massive hats off to everyone at Anthropic. They are doing a phenomenal job. I'm excited to see what 2026 brings for them, if there's an IPO and everything else that comes along with it. I think it's going to be an exciting time. Thank you, everyone, so much for tuning into the podcast. If you enjoyed the episode, the number one thing that you could do to help Connor and I out right now would be to leave a rating and review. We read every single rating. We really appreciate them. We read all the reviews, and we really appreciate everyone that has dropped comments in the last week over on Apple. We finally passed 150 reviews, which we were just so thrilled to hit the milestone. Helps us out a ton in the algorithm. If you wouldn't mind leaving one, if you haven't already, it would help us out a lot. Thanks so much, guys, and I hope you guys all have an incredible rest of your week.